Blog Talk Radio.
Live from Washington, D.C., it's Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio. QLPOR, as it's widely known, features a bevy of poets, spoken word artists, and live poetry readings with best-selling authors. Your host is Dr. Michael Anthony Ingram.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the program. Whenever you hear a poet speak of his or her muse, they refer to the source of the inspiration, creativity, and artistry. The muse is the writer, the poet, and the voice. Tonight, for our quintessential listening pleasure, two acclaimed poets, Jackie Oldham and Lynne Viti, will celebrate the muse. First, I give you Jackie Oldham.
Thank you, Michael.
Welcome,
it's great to be here with you. Thank you. Well, to introduce myself, I'm Jackie Oldham. I'm a native of Baltimore, Maryland, home of Nancy Pelosi. Yay! And I am a poet and essayist. My blog is BaltimoreBlackWoman.com, and I've been working on that for 8 years now. I'm amazed that it's gone that long. So, to talk about the muse, the poems I chose to read tonight reflect the different ways the muse strikes me. And this first poem I'm going to read has as its topic self-discovery and growth. And it's one of my many sources of writing. This particular poem is an Insta poem, ones that I write directly to my personal Facebook page without considering whether they can or should be published properly. As a child, I lived in fear, afraid of myself, weird alien, afraid of failure, not perfect, afraid of being not worthy. Yet something inside, something from above, whispered, keep going. Despite myself, I listened. Now I am unafraid, wonderfully human, flawed yet whole, thankful for being who I always was, me. Thank you. Some of my poems are cerebral. They express issues of humanity or history or, the universe rather than physical nature. But I sometimes use nature as a vantage point. Poem was written a couple of years ago, and it's called Ant Poem Redux. That's Ant, A-N-T. When I needed a break from caring for Mom, I would stand on her front patio, watching the ants travel a to and fro path along the grassy cracks between the paving stones. A two-way highway, one lane each way. I imagined they were traveling like bumper-to-bumper cars on any freeway. Where were they going? Sometimes I'd drop tobacco bits to disrupt their route and maybe poison them to death. But like cars on the freeway, they merely steered around the obstruction and resumed their predestined path. Before grinding my toe to mash a few, like Goliath stomping on Lilliputians, I wondered, do they ever look up to the sky, seeking heaven like you and I? Here's another nature poem that's also unpublished, written in January 2019, titled Winter Swept Over the City. Winter swept over the city like a crisp white sheet, billowing as it is flung over a waiting mattress. I watched it from my windows. Fat white flakes descended heavily to the ground, time and space suspended in silence, broken only by the occasional sound of whirring tires rounding the corner outside. The cold air seeped in through every crack in the house. I drank hot coffee to keep me warm. I hugged my dog, wrapping her under a blanket, still her little shivers as she lay on the couch. Until restored, she played with her toys, slurped water from her bowl, devoured her dinner, licking the bowl clean. Like me, she is creakily aging. I watched the evening news. On the other side of town, a man shoveling his walkway was murdered. Just around the corner from my grandma's house, another man was shot and killed. While the rest of the city played in the snow, sledding down hills, laughing without a care, or walking through woods glowing with snow-covered trees and fields, their exhalations visible frozen air. Changing gears now, I have one of my more cerebral poems that was actually written in December of 2021 while I was daydreaming on my couch. This poem was published in February of this year in Spill Words Daily at spillwords.com. Own time immemorial. On the walls of caves, stick figures of people fending off and herding animals. In stone hieroglyphs adorning the walls of pyramids and sepulchres, temples and cathedrals, graveyards and mausoleums, honoring their living and their dead heroes and gods. Neon lights on the sides of skyscrapers reaching up to the heavens. Eat at Joe's, 1 million served. Best hotel, apartment building, financial institution in the city, in the nation, in the world, in the known universe. Digital recordings of human endeavors flung out into the far reaches of the universe, announcing our presence to billions of stars that shine their own brilliant reflections back at us. Another source of writing for me is current events and politics. And this is another published poem that was posted on Ball Magazine in June of this year. It's called Our Bodies, Our Rights. On June 24th, 2022, at the very hour the Supreme Court struck down Roe v. Wade, I was reclining in a surgical office suite, eyes covered with wet gauze, gums numbed by sharp needles, awaiting the oral surgeon's first slice to extract a rotted tooth. Full I was for the surgeon's skill and care as he patiently explained what he was doing and why and where. Afterward, he showed me the tooth and roots, so small, with an exocytosis besides, that had caused such pain and swelling for the past month. An hour later, in anesthetic daze, I was home again, reading the aftercare instructions, before drifting off for a nap. Dreaming about a girl I knew in the fall of 1975 who rose before dawn, shaking like a falling leaf, to recline in a different office surgical suite to end unintended pregnancy. Ashamed she was, yet grateful too for the surgeon's skill and care, his patient explanation of what he was doing and why and where. She never told her parents, but they knew. Never said a word, but they knew. She never got pregnant again. Had she had the baby, she would have lost her job, lost her nascent career. Every succeeding year, she cried for her lost fetus, wondered what kind of mother she might have been. The day after Roe v. Wade was struck down, a friend asked this question: what are your go-to choices when you feel overwhelmed? I answered, solitude and silence. Music has not charmed to soothe the savage beat of rage in my heart. My teeth hurt, not just because of yesterday's dental surgery to remove a tooth filled with cavities, but because I cannot stop clenching my jaw, grinding my teeth at the horror of it all, the horror of it all. This is my final poem coming up, and this also was published in June of 2022 in the Baltimore Anthology, published by Belt Publishing and edited by Gary Almeter and Rafael Alvarez. I'll just put in a quick plug for this book. It is a wonderful anthology of Baltimore writers, mostly professional, but some with their first contributions to an anthology. The poem is called Ode to Lucille Clifton. She lived an ordinary life. Wife, mother, government worker, teacher, essayist, and poet, revealing through her writing her extraordinary inner life of trauma and healing, pain and joy, injustice and paradox. In language plain and simple, she detailed truth and history with grace and humor, wit infused with mystery, all hallmarks of the human condition, personal in the universe eternal. Thank you.
Jackie?
Yes.
You know, I always enjoy your work.
Mm-hmm.
Extremely eloquent, poignant, and real.
Thank
so I'd like
you.
to ask you a series of questions, if that's okay.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
As we celebrate the Muse,
yes.
When you think about your life and your earliest poems, how does your message differ today?
That's a very interesting question, and I would say that the biggest difference in my current message is my perspective. In my earliest poems, which were written in my teens, I centered on my emerging identity. Who am I? Why am I? And will I ever belong? Those were my most frequent themes. Now, I write more about the world around me, family, love, politics, life, death, the universe. And yet, all these years later, I still ask who and why I am. But now I have the benefit of learning from all those years of experience. So I write more about the lessons that I learned and the things I continue to learn.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You know, we live in a strange era where so much is happening. If you were a poet during a different era, when, where would you want it to exist?
That's another. You're good at hard questions, I tell you. But after thinking about it, I would say that as a Black American woman, if I were still that, I would have liked to live somewhere between the late 19th century, say during the Reconstruction era, and the early 20th century during the Harlem Renaissance, because those eras actually match my sensibilities around freedom, equity, and self-determination.
Oh, I could ask you so many questions on that, but I won't. I won't. We'll keep on going. All right.
I'll just put it this way. I don't back down from anything.
I see. We'll talk offline. You know, I've always enjoyed hearing you share your work. And I've often wondered whether you classify your ability to write poetry as a creative gift or creative art.
Thanks again, Michael. You asked the hard one. And oddly enough, a friend of mine and I were talking about this in a text a few weeks ago. And my friend sees my ability as a creative gift that he doesn't have. Are you breathing heavily? Anyway, so he sees my gift as he sees my ability as a gift that he doesn't have, and yet while we were talking, he began writing a poem about a tree outside his window, and I told him to keep working on it, because writing poetry gives you a more imaginative way to express what you're seeing, feeling, and experiencing. Mm-hmm. And I told him that his poem was valid literally and figuratively, and his vantage point would definitely be different from, but equally as valid as mine. So I say poets are made, not inborn.
All right. I've got to ask, do you think you were meant to be a poet? Do you think you were meant to be a poet?
Yes. I actually
Tell me why. Tell me why, please.
Well, okay. The best way I can say it is that music was my first language. I was always drawn to the sounds, the rhythms, the notes, and all of that. And since the age of 3, I have been a pianist and later learned other instruments. Behind that was words. And so starting at around age 4, I was reading poems and, the children's nursery rhymes and all those kinds of things. And words just stuck with me, and not all kinds of writing. Journal keeping I started young, and even poetry I started, I guess, around 11 or 12. So I hope that answers the question.
Yes, it does. One last one. What surprises you most about being a poet?
Oh, man. I'd have to say the ways that people respond to my work. There are lots of poems that I didn't think that much of, but people really like them. And then there are other poems that, I put some extra heart and soul into them, and they just kind of fell flat. So it's once I would say that it's one thing to write poetry for yourself, but once you start putting yourself out there, it's just amazing the kinds of responses you get. People see things that you didn't even think about while you were writing. So it's very gratifying.
All right. Let's bring Lynne on for her thoughts. Lynne.
Hi,
welcome.
Good evening.
Hello.
Good evening to you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
You sound great.
All right. Shall I start? Start now?
No. What are your thoughts about Jackie and what she shared?
Well, I think I know Jackie well enough to know that she's really a good musician, and I think that listening to lyrics, singing lyrics, playing music, playing the guitar, playing the piano, knowing a lot of songs really intimately and by heart it's a great underpinning for making music without music, which I think is part of what poetry is. So I see that. I really, really like Jackie's political poems. I think that they're sort of fierce and it's her strong voice coming through, and yet at the same time they're approachable, and I find them that I'll go back and look at them over and over again on her blog. I think that I have some myself. I don't think they're as good as hers, and I will not read them tonight because they need more work. But I really feel that that Jackie's explanation for how when you get to a certain point in life, a lot of the material, you don't have to search too hard for material because every little thing you see, you've gotten to be such a good observer of people, and you have more insight than you had when you were 17 or 18 or 20 or 22, when I think, and I can talk about this later, as well when you have your questions for me about
yes.
a lot of it is very inward. It's like my emotion, and you're extremely sensitive as an adolescent and a young adult, and a lot of that comes out in the poetry. So you don't really work as hard on the form. You don't work as hard on the shape. You just want to get that feeling out, and that sort of passionate adolescent and early adulthood energy is enough to carry those early poems. But that's you have to mature. You have to live a little. You got to get some mileage on you, and then you can perhaps have a little bit more perspective.
Wow, that's why I wanted to hear your voice. It's incredible what you shared. It really was. Yeah. All right. Thank you, Jackie. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, audience, now Lynne Viti.
Well, thanks again, Michael, for giving me this opportunity. I spent the first few months of COVID completely paralyzed when it came to writing poetry or anything else, and I did a lot of baking, though, and my house was very clean. So I've been playing catch-up, and I have a new book that just came out 2 weeks ago called The Walk to Cefalu, which is a city on the Tyrrhenian Sea, which is part of the Mediterranean in Sicily, and I'm going to read a little bit of that later. I'm not going to read the whole poem because it's extremely long, and everyone would just turn their online radio off and go to sleep. So I'm going to read some of the other new poems, and then I have a couple that are so new that they're not even published in anything, if we have time. So I'm going to read the intro poem to this book, which is sort of an ars poetica, something that explains the reason for writing poetry. And that sort of sets the tone for this book. And the poem is called She Said, They Said, I Say. Beneath each little story I was told by my mother, aunts, grandmother, stories with well-defined plots, narratives populated by the storytellers themselves, assisted by a cast of characters. Beneath each tale, I sensed another, a truer story, an alternate text, a painful experience smoothed over, packaged not only for me, but for the grown-ups as well. The war made your uncle an alcoholic. Uncle Sam made him a bombardier. It broke him. Your father was so changed after his accident. When we had to send you to live with Aunt Kay, I visited you every day. You were always an oversensitive child. Digging up the understory's bones to get at the marrow, sucking out the deepest part of my history, telling it, that's my job. Okay, that's the end of that one. Some of these poems, I don't know really what happened in the deep residues of my family history, so I just make things up because I'm a poet. So here's one where I only knew some of the details. When he walked off the ship, 1945. I should say that some of these poems are set in Baltimore, and I too am from Baltimore, born, bred, and buttered in Baltimore, as we say. When he walked off the ship, 1945. She hardly recognized him, gaunt, muscles atrophied, broken front teeth, a small gash in his forehead. He wore his navy whites, his hat cocked, his hair in tufts under the Dixie cup. He was 34, looked 60. She waited at the dock, breathing deep to keep herself calm, repeated his name to herself like a response she might have made in church, a mumbled amen, or pray for us who have recourse to thee. Her eyes followed him as he walked down the gangplank. Once he was ashore, she threw her arms around him, trying to pick up where they had left off before he enlisted and was on his way to Pensacola, Calcutta, Chengdu, Mongolia. Dots on the Mercator projection map she pinned up for her 7th grade geography pupils. His cover was aerographer's mate, first class. His outfit worked for Chiang Kai-shek's secret police, months of tracking the weather from the outpost in Happy Valley, Inner Mongolia. There was never enough to eat, and nothing like the American fare he was used to. On the road with the Chinese guerrillas, the Yanks carried their food in necklaces of canvas sacks filled with rice. Disease, infection, malaria, cholera. He wrote her 900 days of letters, whole swaths of words blacked out by military censors. He never told her the whole truth of what he saw and did. Preferred more cheerful subjects, the Chinese generals' operas, a Christmas party the sailors gave for the children, an impromptu party when a case of Old Forester arrived. All these letters she hid in the attic. That's the end of that one. Here's one that a friend who may be listening tonight asked me if I would read, so I hope he's listening. This is set at St. Dominic's Catholic Church in the Hamilton section of Baltimore. Midnight Mass. We arrived at 10 of 12, my father and I, at St. Dominic's, my grandmother's church, though now she was tucked away in a nursing home south of the city, where nuns in nurses' uniforms cared for her, prayed the rosary with her until her mind went. The nursing home doctor prescribed restraints so grandmother wouldn't assault the kind nuns or scratch herself till her thin arms. St. Dominic's was a grand church with statues of the Blessed Virgin, vaulted ceilings, marble altar, stations of the cross, painted wood trimmed with gilt as fancy as you'd see in any cathedral. 2 heavy doors, glass doors, at the front, too modern for the ornate church, the old rectory and the parish school, a sturdy structure of gray gneiss, things that were always there. I must have absorbed all this, though what was important was being with my father on Christmas in the days of the Latin Mass, genuflecting at the pew he chose, watching him flip up the kneeler to accommodate his bad leg. I opened my Sunday missal to the Mass of the catechumens. The priest faced the altar, not us. He mumbled church Latin. I loved the sameness of it all, the waiting till the usher approached, waved us into the communion line. I loved standing behind my father, shuffling to the altar rail, waiting for him to kneel laboriously. I loved sticking out my tongue to receive the tasteless paper host. I loved walking to our pew, hiding my face in my hands, praying for whatever it was I prayed for in those days, usually for God to repair my father's leg, make him walk again without the brace. My thoughts wandered to Christmas morning, whether I'd find what I'd asked for under the tree. Everyone stood up. The priest, his back to us, was saying, Ite missa est. I knew this because I read the English on the page facing the Latin. The Mass is ended, it said. But we weren't done. We said prayers for the conversion of Russia. I loved these, especially asking for protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil who wandered the world seeking the ruin of souls. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus, have mercy on us. Now the Mass truly ended. My father grasped the pew in front of us, pulled himself to stand. We exited with a slow-moving crowd, disgorged onto the front steps of the church. In the black night, everything seemed possible. Merry Christmas, pal, my father said. Want to get breakfast? And that's the end of that one. Thank you. Summer jobs. Summer jobs. This is about a restaurant that has been, I think, redesigned as not what it was back in the day. And the poem will tell the tale. Dirty Secrets of Summer Help. Out in horse country, where the Blue Book people lived, we worked the 4 to midnight in our polyester uniforms, black shoes with thick soles. We came in the back door, punched in with the year-rounders, Millie, Bessie, Queenie, real name Queen Esther. Queenie showed us how to open the wine, offer the cork to the gentleman, pour a splash into the glass for tasting. He won't know beans, Queenie said. He'll act like he does. Just smile. The kitchen smelled of crab cakes and red snapper and stale food. The floor coated with it. Sometimes the waitresses and bussers slid, weighed down by metal trays of food. Lucille, called Salad Girl, though she was as old as my mother, tall and slender like my mother, but carried something my mother did not, a deep scar on her right temple. I caught that bullet, Lucille said, but I was all right. She kicked the husband out. Over the years, the place went bankrupt, was revived, went bust again. Queenie went to Bible school, became a minister at the Free Will Baptist Church. The owner lives in Florida now, collects Social Security, sells crab cakes from a food truck. True story. Okay, I'm going to move into a later section of the book. This book has, this poetry collection, which is a full-length one, it has 6 sections. And this particular section is a sort of a section of elegies. And this one is, it's about a town along the western coast of Ireland called Letterfrack in County Galway. It's very near the beach. It's known as an arts town. There are a lot of visual artists. There are a lot of poets who hang out there. It's near a big mountain in the Connemara Mountains called the Diamond, which is a big hiking challenge for people. And in this, well, I'll let the poem tell the story. Leaving Letterfrack, County Galway. Already I miss the ghosts of those lost boys, maltreated by the so-called Christian brothers. I miss the graveyard where the small headstones recite each boy's name and age at death. 10, 12, 14, the little crosses line up in perfect straight rows. No wonder all of Ireland has lost the faith. Now preschoolers' laughter spills from their playground, a stone's throw from the old industrial school. My heart is weighed down by thoughts of boys whose misdemeanors or unruliness at home landed them in that hellish place. Starved, beaten, violated, neglected in the classroom, and punished, tortured in their dormitories, damaged, unprepared for work. On this luxury coach, I leave the bleak Letterfrack behind, till all that's left of the place for me is the poetry, whereby poets pay tribute to the boys of Letterfrack, mark their suffering, keep their memory ever present, in verse posted on pub doors, on the path by the youth hostel, up the lane to the cemetery, all testaments to those dark acts and that suffering buried in the Letterfrack earth. Here's another one, which is an elegy for a friend, but it's not as dark as that one. Ghost at the Folk Festival, for Dawn. An ambitious sun slides through the cloud cover. I've sweat through my clothes by noon. We hear the thumps of sound checks, the chatter of people strolling in to claim their territory. They spread blankets, set up chairs on dusty ground. Faint breezes from the bay barely reach the park. Behind us, shade tents full of toddlers and fussy parents. Ahead, 50 rows of folding chairs. When we wander down the asphalt thoroughfare, we're swept up in fans, ambling to the next soundstage, maybe to hear a rising star. The old folkies are dying out, Pete Seeger and his ilk gone. Among the white tents where vendors hawk Indonesian batik wraps, sun hats, henna tattoos, I expect to see you, hear your voice at my back. I'd turn fast to hear your quip. In a minute, you'd have me laughing. But of course, you're not here. Your wife slipped your ashes into the water off Salter's Point. She sits on the dock summer days, conversing with you. At the festival, I look for you among the couples and the families, in the lines to the portable toilets, at the guitar giveaway booth, by the grilled cheese and French street food trucks near the Jumbotron, in the crowd shuffling from act to act, morning till sundown, until their heads are stuffed with so much music they can't listen to another note. Sailboats line up in the waters off Fort Adams. Their sails and masts point to the heavens. Electric piano, twanging guitars salute you. Speak in my ear, old friend, surprise me, in this place made for such occasions. I'm going to stop and drink a little water after that one. Okay. Here's one more elegy. This is set on Cape Cod, and it marks, I think it's now 4 years ago, when a young man was attacked by a shark when he was surfing and he lost his life. And the beach is called Newcomb Hollow Beach. This is in the town of Wellfleet, very far out on Cape Cod, the outer Cape. Meditations at Newcomb Hollow for Arthur Gouveia Medici, 1992, 2018. 1 was the year we learned the ocean no longer belonged to us. For years we waded into its waters, hoisted our children onto our shoulders. Then the sea began to swarm with fat seals. When the sharks came for the seals, the sea we set our daily calendars by, whose tides we arranged our beach days around, became a sea of death, of blood cutting through water, a place for caution, for catastrophizing about, for catastrophe. 2. At the head of the dune, a surfboard tombstone is lodged into the sand adorned with milagros, rope bracelets, scraps of poetry, dirty flip-flops, photographs, keychains. Shred on, brother, someone has inscribed in black marker on a piece of gray driftwood. 3. Black-clad surfers ply the waves with impunity, emerge from the water. Work awaits them, morning duties, though their real work is shredding the green water. Seals rise up at regular intervals, unaware of danger. Here is where the brother surfer was sacrificed to the shark, drawn by the seals, but striking anything to fulfill its carnivorous destiny. 4. Now the accoutrements of human progress arrive. First aid kits, tourniquets, phone access to fire rescue, warnings on the Sharktivity app, post-mortem measures. Post your death, gentle surfer. New protocols to embrace. 5. We are so old to only now be losing our innocence. I'm watching my time, so I'm going to skip to part of the last poem. And if I have more time, I have a funny one I can read. So this is a long poem, it's about 4 or 5 pages long, about a hike, a long hike, a 56-mile hike. It took 6 or 7 days from the town of Enna, which is right smack in the middle of the island of Sicily. From Enna, we walked all the way to Cefalù, but not in one day. And this is the story of the last day. It was a hot May afternoon by the time we get to this very last section of the poem. If you read the whole poem, which I hope you will, because I hope you will buy the book or ask for your library to buy the book. We reached finally this city, a small seaside town, really, of Cefalù. But we thought we were there, but we still had a lot farther to go, and it was hot, and our feet were hurting, and some people were losing toenails, and there were about 12 of us walking together, and it was a big challenge, and it was such a victory when we got there. So I'll just read the very last section. You'll miss the build-up, and you'll miss the lunches and all the food and the good wine. Section 5. One more hill, then we began our final descent. How long it took for those with bruised black toes, blisters, twisted ankles, aching feet to finish our trek. But I can tell you this, the waters of the Tyrrhenian Sea were the finest I've ever stepped into. I rolled my pants up, tread carefully around the slick rocks, pushed my feet into the wet sand. Martina stuck bottles of Prosecco into the water to keep them cool till we gathered on the sand. I cupped my hands and bathed my arms with the blue water, the same sea the Phoenicians, Normans, Carthaginians sailed. The wine fizzed in my mouth. I held out my glass for seconds. Anything after this, a superb dinner, posh hotel, a slower pace, would pale. More, per favore, I said to Martina, and she refilled my glass to the very brim. That night, we would feast on frutti di mare at an osteria, delight in the pasta, sea bream, contorni. But for now, we toasted one another to fellowship, to Cefalù, and to the perfect, eternal, blue Tyrrhenian Sea. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lynne.
Well, you're more than welcome.
I always enjoy hearing you read.
Thank you.
I always enjoy it. You know, your work to me, even tonight, is extremely descriptive, full of rich imagery, and extremely captivating. I was wrapped up in it, so thank you for sharing your work. And the title of your new book again is?
It's called The Walk to Cefalù. That's the name of the city. It's a soft C, Cefalu. And if you look at a map of Sicily, it's right in the northern edge of Sicily. It's right in the middle, and it sticks out. And it's, you look it up on Wikipedia, it'll get 1 million hits. It's right. Quite a beautiful place. And it was really nice to get there.
I'm sure. Where can a listener find your book, Lynne?
I'm glad you asked that, because I checked right before this. The book just came out on the 23rd of September, and it immediately is on all the big booksellers like Barnes & Noble and Amazon, bookshop.org, which I really like because they give some of the money that they receive from purchasers to small independent bookstores nationwide.
All right, very nice.
So bookshop.org, Target, Walmart, and you can go to your little local bookstore and tell them my name, Lynne Viti, V-I-T-I, and they should be able to pull up all of my books. So,
all right,
Baltimore
fantastic.
Girls is my first one, and I have a lot of Baltimore-themed books. Dancing at Lake Montebello, which is a big man-made lake in the middle of northeast Baltimore. I would like to say you could buy it at your grocery store, but I don't think you can yet. I wish.
Maybe one day, my friend. Maybe one day.
And also, I think that some of one of the earlier books, I think you can also get an ebook version of it. And I don't know about this one, if it's an ebook yet, but hopefully it will be at some point.
All right, very nice. You know, life changes whether we want it to or not.
That's for sure.
Whether we want it to or not. Right. Yes. So when you think about your life and your earliest poems, how does your message differ today?
Well, I started writing poems when I was pretty little. And they were like babyish poems. You know, they had a lot of rhymes, and they were about flowers and birds and cats and dogs and such. And I think I got serious about writing poetry in high school, and I wrote a lot of poems I didn't show to people because they were like too mushy. But I wrote a poem about my sister when I was in high school, and I won a national prize for it. So that sort of validated for me that I could be a poet. However, I was a very ambitious student, and I was the first in my family to go to a 4-year college, and my mom had gone to a 2-year college and was a teacher, but then she went back when she was in her late 40s to get her bachelor's degree because she had to in order to keep her job. But for me, I was like, I went to a small liberal arts college. I was I really wanted to do well. And so I did continue to sort of dabble in poetry, but I did not really share it or show it to anybody. But I studied a lot of poetry. I was an English major. I took as many English courses as I could, and a lot of poetry. And then I became an English teacher, and I taught a lot of poetry, and I taught creative writing, and I would continue to write, but I guess I was just too insecure to publish. So I really got going on my publication late in the game, after my kids were grown up, when my nest was emptier and I had more time, and I kind of just went at it hammer and tong, and I've been very successful in getting things published. So that, I guess I just need to put it out there. So I'm glad. I wish I'd done it sooner, but I don't know if I would have had the energy and time sooner, because I had 2 jobs and 2 kids and a husband and 2 cats. It was a busy life.
All right. I'll ask you the same question. If you were a poet during a different era, when, where would you want it to exist?
That was a really good question. And when Jackie started and said like the Reconstruction era, I was going, what about the Harlem Renaissance? So I would say that I think, with the exception of Amy Lowell and H.D. and I'm blanking on her name, Edna St. Vincent Millay, it was hard to be a woman poet during the 20s, 30s, maybe even 40s. I think I would answer that question by saying I'm just fine with where I am. I look back at the last few poets laureate, Joy Harjo. Now we have Ada Limon. We had Natasha Trethewey. We had Gwendolyn Brooks. We had, I'm thinking this is a good time to be a woman poet. So I would like to say I can't answer that question because I'm fine with right now. I really am.
Right. I understand.
I'm in the moment, I am. I think this is a great time, and I think because there have been poets like Billy Collins and Richard Blanco and Layli Long Soldier and Amanda Gorman, who have really pushed poetry into the public eye. It's not just in the dusty books anymore in the library. Now it's out there in the public, in the marketplace, in the public sphere, that it's a great time. I mean, everybody's writing poetry, and that's a good thing. We need to be more like Iceland in that way, where everybody writes poetry. So more poetry. Good.
All right. So how would you classify your ability to write poetry? As a creative gift or a creative art? Well,
I think, I'm a firm believer in the, 5% inspiration, 95% perspiration approach to any kind of creative writing, whether it's fiction, creative nonfiction, a good memo, a good essay. I think you have an idea, and I have folders full of these ideas. And when I was looking at them before, and I thought, well, if I ever get around to this might be a good poem. But right now it's just a few words, or it's something somebody said. And so I think here's one. I found this in an old journal from college. It says, quote, "Read these poems slowly," said the professor, as, quote, "as you would read a love letter." And I think this was the poet Kenneth Koch, whose course I took. And then I started to write a poem. A love letter? I do not think I have ever had a love letter from the people who really loved me. And then it goes on. But it's not really, it's just fragments. But I think you start with an idea. You start with an observation. You start with something somebody says. You start with something you see. And then you start to write about it. And you write and write and write and write and write until you've kind of beaten it to death. And then you put it aside. And then you go back and say, is this a poem? Can I make this better? And so I think that the making it better is where the rubber hits the road, as the old ad said. You really have to work at it. I think occasionally there are people who can just spit something out and, it's one and done, but it almost can always be. So I think it's a gift. It's a gift to be verbal. You have to be verbal. You have to have an appreciation for the sound, and you have to be a good observer.
Yes.
But aside from that, you've got to work at it. It's like baseball. You may have a good glove, but if you don't practice, you're not going to be the best baseball player in the world.
Well, which brings up my next question. Do you think you were meant to be a poet?
Do you think, I'm sorry, that I was made to be a poet?
Okay. Do you think you were meant to be a poet? Were you meant to be a poet?
Oh, meant to be a poet. Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, probably. I mean, I grew up with a mother who was a teacher and a great reader, and she didn't read modern contemporary poetry, but she, as a child, had been made to memorize so many poems, and she would recite them all the time. She had like 50 poems. She could just recite them at the drop of a hat. And so she would, like when I was little, she would read me books of poetry. She would read me like The Child's Garden of Verse. She would read me anthologies that had poems by Carl Sandburg and Ogden Nash. I loved Ogden Nash when I was a kid. And Robert, did I say Robert Louis Stevenson? So I was, and also when I got to high school, junior high we studied poetry too, but when I got to high school, wow, my high school was amazing. I mean, we read everything. We studied everything. I remember I said to my mother one time, I want to go down to Ford's Theater. I want us to get tickets and go see Black Nativity. And my mother says, Black Nativity, Langston Hughes. And I said, how do you know that? She said, Langston Hughes is in my course I'm taking now at Hopkins at night for night school. I have to take this course in American literature. So I could talk to my mother about Langston Hughes or, Robert Frost. So I think that when you're around somebody like that, it rubs off. And then my teachers at Mercy High School in Baltimore were phenomenal teachers.
Right.
So
finally, what surprises you most about being a poet? Oh,
I was thinking about something that Jackie said about how you write something and people go, oh, this is so good, and you think, oh, I didn't think that was kind of my throwaway poem, like I kind of needed to read it, so I did, right? That surprises me. But what surprises me more than anything else is I will have a poem that grows out of a very, very personal experience. Somebody that I don't know that well will either hear the poem or will buy my book and read the poem and say, that poem completely resonates with me because something like that happened to me. And when I read this poem, I couldn't believe that you had a similar experience. You connected with this person that you don't even know. That's another one. And I think when sometimes people will, I write a poem. I have one about when my husband had gone back to our house, and I'd been stayed at the beach for a couple of days, and he had to come back for work, and he came back down. But while he was gone, I borrowed his hat. I loved his sun hat, and I wrote a poem called "In Your Absence, I Am Wearing Your Hat." And so I wrote this poem about it, and this woman who had lost her husband like 7 or 8 years before said, I read that poem and I cried. I cried and cried and cried because it reminded me of John. And I thought, wow, I didn't write it as a serious poem, but I can see how somebody would read it that way. And that surprised me. You never know how you're going to reach people or
That's
whether
true.
you're going to reach them. Or whether they're just sitting
true.
there politely thinking, how soon can I get out of here and go get a cup of coffee and a donut? They're just being polite. That's why it's fun to read for kids, because if you're reading for like 14-year-olds, you know whether you have them in the palm of your hand or whether they could care less about what you're saying.
Yes. Well, I like to bring Jackie in.
Oh,
hello,
thank you.
Jackie. Yes.
Hi, Michael and Lynn.
Yes.
I'm good.
Hi, my friend.
Hello, dear friend.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness. First off, I have to tell you how much I loved your poems. I
thank
can't
you.
wait to be able to buy the book. And I've got to tell you, the things that stand out to me with the works you read are just how detailed they are, the everyday little details. It's like having a painting in words. Because
thank you.
set the scene so beautifully, and yet, the observations that you make the poems. I'm thrilled with your latest work. I am. Yes, indeed.
Oh, thank you.
And thinking about, I guess now's the time we can talk about our common upbringing, because Lynn and I both grew up in Baltimore, and we actually were in adjacent neighborhoods. So I know St. Dominic's Church because in my teen religious whatevers, I took catechism. I didn't become Catholic. Yes, I didn't become Catholic.
I thought you were going to tell me, that St. Thomas had a reputation for having the best CYO dances, and I was
I didn't get to go to the dances, but I did take catechism for a while, and so just all the things. When Lynn writes about Baltimore, I know what she's talking about because I've been there. Lake Montebello and all of that good stuff.
Jackie, I just want to say thank you for plugging the Baltimore Anthology. It's called. It's called. What is it?
Oh Lord.
It's called A Fighting Place.
Yes.
Wait a minute, I'm going to
look it up. A lovely place. Yeah, Fighting Place, a lovely place.
A charmer or something like that.
A charmer, right? Yep.
That's charmer. It is a lovely place, a fighting place, a charmer, the Baltimore Anthology, and it's published by a publisher called Belt City that does all Rust Belt towns, so like Pittsburgh and Cleveland. And this anthology has something for everybody. I mean, I'm boasting too because I have a poem in it, but as well as Jackie. But it's really, really worth whatever it is, the $18. And again, get your library listeners to buy it because it is.
Jackie, I'd like to hear about BaltimoreBlackWoman.com. Tell me more about that. Your blog site.
My goodness. Okay. Well, let's see. I actually started it in December of 2014, and at the time I was a caregiver for my mother, and I was writing a lot, and I just felt like I needed an outlet for the writing. And I had a friend and former colleague named Russ Van Westervelt, who had started his own blog on WordPress, and I got the idea, I think it's time for me to do it. And I also, time was responding to President Obama's call for a discussion on race. And, of course, race has always been, top of mind for me. So I started it, and I just went from there. It started spreading beyond, I would do Black History Month posts featuring either poet friends of mine or just looking at different parts of Black history. And those remained the most popular posts on the blog. But then later, actually around 2018, when I met Lynn online for the first time, because she had Googled squeegee boys, and I had written about squeegee boys. These are the kids. These are the kids that clean your windshields
It was something I was working on for my,
And then we met. Lynne came home to Baltimore for a reading and introduced me to our mutual friend, Rafael Alvarez, who was hosting Lynne's reading and had also been a writer for the Baltimore Sun papers and what was it he wrote for? Was it The Wire or the other?
He was one of probably the biggest script writer for season 2 of The Wire, the one that was set down at the dock.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So I was a big fan of The Wire, taught The Wire. I drove everyone crazy because I went around quoting The Wire all the time. And and when I found out that Alvarez was back in Baltimore, I kind of stalked him. I kind of I wrote him I wrote him a fan letter and and we started. He said, "Oh, do you have any poems about this?" And I said, "Sure." And I would write some and send them to him. So but he's been very very supportive, very supportive.
Yes, of me too. And in fact, he gave me my first poetry reading at one of his readings with Ralphie down at the Icaro's restaurant. And everything since then, that was 2018, everything since then has just shot out basically from that. And I'm so grateful to know Lynne and to know Ralphie. Yeah.
All right, so BaltimoreBlackWoman.com.
Yes.
We're celebrating the Muse. And I wanted to ask you both, I know we've got to go, but can you pinpoint when your hand was touched by the Muse? I can. So that's why I asked that question. Because I can.
I don't know. She's very difficult. She's very difficult. Very difficult person because she kind of plays hard to get. So you have to kind of say, I've been up here sitting, putting my rear end into the chair, and I've got this pen and the yellow paper, and I'm really working hard. Where are you? Please. But every once in a while, I'll get halfway into something, and then I feel like it's automatic writing. It's like I don't know, I just write it, and I guess that's the way she manifests. I guess.
Yes, at the time you least expect it.
For me, I did not start writing poetry until I was 32 years old, either 32 or 34. And whatever was in me that needed to come out, it came out in a poetic way. And I guess the rest is history. But I started late in life. But something about poetry it just changed my life. It literally changed my life.
I don't think 32 is that old, Michael. I mean, Anne Sexton started writing poetry until she was almost 40. Of course, 32 seems really young now, doesn't it?
It does now. A lifetime ago. I'd like you both to do me a favor. I know you're ready to go, but I want to end this celebration with both of you sharing just one more poem. Lynne says you had a funny one that you wanted to share. You didn't get a chance to do it, so I'd like you to share your funny one.
Okay.
And Jackie, whatever you like. And that's how we'll end tonight's program.
Okay.
Jackie, you go first, Jackie.
No,
yes. Because I have to pull mine up on the computer. Because I thought I had.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, all right. Okay, so I can find it. It'll take me 1 second. But I'll give a little background for listeners that are young. Let's see. Oh dear, where is it? Oh, wrong year. I'm sorry. I thought I had written it this year, but I had written it last year. All right, so here it is. Okay, so listeners, you may not know this, but Candice Bergen's father was a famous ventriloquist, and his dummy was named Charlie McCarthy. That's all you need to know. Okay, so the poem, it's a persona poem, and it's called When I Was Invited to Tea by My Real Brother, Charlie McCarthy. My mother always swore he was the brother I never had. He lived with us from the time I was old enough to work his mouth, pulling the string to make his jaw open and close. He always spoke for me. When he wasn't on the road, Charlie and I ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. He sat in a booster chair next to me. I didn't even have to say grace or ask to be excused from the table. I was shy. He never stopped talking. I preferred dungarees and tennis shoes. He was always decked out in tux and top hat. He stayed up till 2. He loved the Late Show. I was always in bed by 8. After I started school, I didn't see much of him. He sent me postcards from Las Vegas or London, cities that to me were just photos in my Viewmaster. But one day, when I was in 7th grade, my mother handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written on it in old-fashioned cursive, preceded by Miss. Inside, an invitation to tea on a Sunday afternoon at the Ritz. Charlie hadn't forgotten me. My mother said he was busy building his career. She worried what he'd do when Bergen got too old for the act. She took me to Brenner's to try on party dresses. I wanted a sheath dress with a jewel neckline, high heels and nylons. Brenner's didn't have those, only party dresses that looked like the ribbon hard candy my grandma put out at Christmas, shiny pink and white. I'd rather wear school clothes to tea. Charlie waited for me on the street in front of the Ritz. He wore white gloves, carried a cane with a pearl handle. He bowed, took my hand, and kissed it. That was sweet. But as we climbed the stairs to the tea room, he told me he'd do all the talking. He'd tell the waiter which kind of tea. He'd choose the savories, the pastries. I said I wanted petit fours, but he said I was a bit chubby, better stick to the sandwiches. I couldn't get a word in. He monopolized the conversation. I played with the silverware, turning it over and over on the damask tablecloth. I didn't care if he was my real brother. I didn't hate him. I just found him boring. I never saw him again after that, except on Ed Sullivan or the Smothers Brothers. I guess he was famous, but I never told my friends. He was just a dummy, a comedy act for old people, whereas I was on my way to being cool.
Wow. I said your work was descriptive. It's acutely descriptive. I mean, it's incredible. It's like a laser sharp. Oh, man. Incredible writer. Wow.
I forgot to say in my little intro that this dummy always had on like a monocle and like a top hat. He looked like an English gentleman or something, you know.
Yeah.
But he was a smart aleck.
Yes, he was.
You know, and I actually, it's amazing how many people, when you do this at a reading, will say, "I had one of those." It's like, really? Did you have him talk for you? Yep. Yep. Oh, Charlie McCarthy.
All right, Jackie, bring us home. Jackie.
Okay. All right, here it comes. I have been for the last 3 years invited to read at a synagogue that I'm affiliated with, Beth Am Synagogue in West Baltimore, Reservoir Hill neighborhood. And it's such an honor to read there. There's a theme every year, a different theme every year. And so it's just a great way to bring that muse to work for you. Okay, so this one is from 2019, which in the Hebrew year was 5780, and the theme was coming home. And at the time, Beth Am was coming back to their building after a major renovation. So this poem is called Coming Home. You welcomed me as a stranger, took me by the hand, showed me the lay of the land, told me there was no danger, and gave me shelter. You listened to my stories, then shared your glories, your trials and tribulations as wanderers without a nation. We are all strangers in a strange land, you said. Come sit with us. Break bread with us, you said. Share our blessings, and together we shall find rest. We have worshiped together, prayed together, praised together. We have laughed and cried, celebrated and mourned, debated and learned, stood our ground together. You welcomed me as a stranger and gave me a space to come home to. And I thank you, Michael and Lynn, for having that same wonderful spirit of making me feel at home. Thank you both.
Oh, wow. That is so nice. Well, I want to thank you both. I've got the biggest smile on my face.
Yeah,
we did celebrate the Muse tonight. It was a wonderful, wonderful program. Lynne Viti and Jackie Oldham, I wish you nothing but the best to the both of you. All right?
Same here, Michael, and thank you so much for the opportunity to reach all of these listeners out there in radio land. It's really fun.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
fun.
Very, very nice. Thank you.
Thank
all
you,
right.
Jackie.
And to the listeners, to the listeners, find your muse. Muse. Find your muse. Find your muse, please, and celebrate him or her. All right. And as I always share every week, every program, let poetry ring somewhere throughout the land. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.
Quintessential Listening, Poetry Online Radio, is available on iTunes, Spotify, SoundCloud, and Stitcher. You can also check out the website at QLPOR.com.
Okay.